my goodness. Hi. I was just finishing baking up some Christmas muffins. Oh, let's get on with the story. We've got so much to tell. Well, as I told you before, I was working for the Walt Disney Company, and I was doing my production stage managing of the parade, and I had the book finally, And I had the wonderful pleasure of being able to work with Santa, because the last float of the parade, Santa is there. And he's waving to all the boys and girls there at Walt Disney World, and to you when you watch it on TV. Well, I got the honor and the pleasure of giving him one of the books. And I told him the story of how my journey as a little girl reading this book, and then trying to find it so badly, and then finally, literally 30 years later, finding the book. 30 years. Well, I'll tell you, Santa, as I told him the story, of course, teared up and began to cry and hugged me and said, "That's a beautiful story." And he said, "I'm going to take this book and I'm going to cherish it." And that last parade that I worked, he had the book with him on the sleigh up there on the float. And as he was waving to all the boys and girls, he held up the book and he touched his nose. And he said, "That was for me." And it was such a wonderful pleasure and a gift to be able to give that book that I had been reading to my children for years to Santa. I was so happy. Anyway, let's get on with The Adventures of Nicholas, Chapter 8. One Christmas Eve, Nicholas did not have such an easy time making his rounds of the village houses. To begin with, he was considerably amused and rather dismayed to discover that instead of one embroidered bag for each house, the children had followed little Lauren's example and had put out a woolen stocking. So with some families having 5 or 6 children, there was quite often a row of stockings nailed up on the door. Of course, Nicholas could not very well put just one toy in each stocking. It made the rest of it look so flat and empty. But since he hadn't stocked his sleigh with enough gifts so that there would be several for each child, he found himself with an empty sleigh and only halfway through his list. "Luckily, I have that extra supply of toys at home in the chest," he said to himself as he made a flying trip back to the cottage for more gifts. He loaded the sleigh again and started out once more, but with the night half gone and his list not completed. Poor old Lufka, his horse, tried his best, but he was getting old and could not make very fast progress through the heavy snow. He kept turning a patient head around at Nicholas, who spoke to him encouragingly. "Come on now, lad. Only 2 more houses. You can make it. The sleigh's not so heavy now. And with all that double load delivered..." Lufka wagged his head at his master's voice and tossed it in the air as though to say, "Yes, but tonight we had to make an extra trip back to the cottage, and when I thought I was going to be nicely bedded down for the night, off you went again. And I must say I like the snow better when there was a crust on top instead of this heavy stuff. I'm always stumbling there now." Down went the good old beast into a ditch, and crack went one of the sleigh runners. Nicholas climbed down, and after reassuring himself that Lufka had no broken bones, shook his head ruefully at the sight of the old sleigh. "I guess that's the end of that, old boy," he remarked to Lufka, who had stumbled upright and was now busy trying to flick off the snow off of his tail. "Looks as though we'll have to get a new sleigh. And I'm afraid your traveling days are over. You're getting a little old for this heavy driving." Nicholas had to finish his Christmas visits on foot, and his first rosy streaks of dawn were brightening the sky when he and Lufka finally returned to the cottage. Nicholas, fat and rosy, puffing heavily, Lufka dragging his tired old bones straight to the door of his stable. For many days after that particular Christmas Eve, the villagers and children who passed by Nicholas's door noticed that he was not working at his bench. Instead, there could be heard sounds of hammering and sawing from the large shed where he kept his supply of wood. and where he did the larger pieces of wood, which required more room. The villagers said to each other, "Must be some beautiful bridal chest that keeps Nicholas so busy these days. Or maybe it's a boat he's building for himself," they joked. Spring came, and the late northern spring, and Nicholas was again seen at his workbench. When curious townsfolk questioned him on his long secret task of the winter, he would only shake his dark yellow head. The yellow was now beginning to show streaks of white, and say with a sly smile, "You'll see soon enough, just you wait." Soon, however, the villagers forgot their curiosity in a new and exciting piece of news which was spreading over the village. Nicholas heard it at his workbench, where people of all ages gathered now and then to chat with the woodcarver. "What's this I hear about the squire, Otto?" Nicholas asked his old friend with whom he had lived as a boy. "Ah," said Otto, puffing contentedly at his pipe and settling down to the long gossip. "They say things haven't gone so well for him these last 5 years or more. First, there were those ships of his that didn't come home. Then they say that his overseer ran away with a good part of this year's rents." Yes, put in old Hans Clinker. "And then there was that matter of a mine that his son persuaded him to invest in." "Too bad," they all sighed, with a short, self-satisfied air that they would have done nothing so foolish with their money if they had ever had any to be foolish with. And now Otto continued, leaning forward with the most interesting part of the story. "Now he has to sell most of his lands and household goods to pay the creditors and start in again. Will you be going up to the sale tomorrow, Nicholas?" Nicholas looked up from the piece of wood he was planing to ask, "Now what would I be buying from the squire? I don't want any more land. I can make for myself any fine furniture as he has in his house." "He has some animals up there," said old Hans. "Those 2 horses now, and that set of reindeer." "True enough," said Nicholas, finally interested enough to put his work down. "Rivka's too old to be much help to me now. I think I might go up there with you boys tomorrow and see some of the excitement." So the next morning found Nicholas in the center of an eager, curious crowd. Farmers who hoped to get some of the squire's good land cheap. Fishermen who were interested in 2 or 3 boats the squire owned. Housewives who thought they might make a chair or table from such a fine household, and scores of others who had come along just to watch the rest of the crowd. Nicholas wandered down to the stables and was instantly surrounded by a group of men who knew he was interested in the horses and were ready to give him much free advice. Nicholas, however, walked past the stables where the horses were lodged and made directly for the larger stalls. "He's after Donder and Blitzen," the men whispered among themselves. "He's always admired them, they went so fast." Yes, there was Nicholas, his round figure in his bright red suit, standing at the door of the stable, his hands on his roomy hips, gazing thoughtfully into the darkened stalls. 2 deer inside, excited at the noises of the crowd, thrust their frightened heads through the top part of the door. "Well," said Nicholas softly, "you poor beasties don't look much like thunder and lightning now. Not afraid of me, are you?" He put a reassuring hand on the larger deer's shoulder. The melting brown eyes looked trustingly into his blue. The deer whimpered and thrust its warm black nose into Nicholas's hand. "I guess we'll get along all right," said Nicholas in a satisfied tone. "Now to find your master and see about the sale." "Here's the squire now," called out one of the men. "Nicholas wants to buy Donder and Blitzen, squire." The squire, a bent old man, with a worried look on his face, seemed dazed by this mob of people taking possession of his house and goods. "Well, he can't have Donder and Blitzen alone," he said almost fretfully. "That set of reindeer go together or not at all. Why, Donder would go raving mad if he tried to separate her from the rest of her family." "Family?" exclaimed Nicholas. "Why, squire, I only need 2 reindeer. How many more?" Suddenly, there was a loud crash of breaking wood, a mad rush of people away from one of the stalls, and seemingly in one brown streak, there was a little reindeer running madly about the farmyard, pursuing one unfortunate villager who couldn't run as fast as the others. "That's Vixen," shouted the old squire. distracted. Here, catch him quick. He's a young imp. He'll hurt somebody. Everybody ran around in a frenzy, but Vixen was nimble and even paused in his mad rush to look impudently over his shoulder at his pursuers. Then he would give a naughty toss of his head as if to say, "Come on, catch me," and was off again, leaping over carts and farming implements, knocking a man's hat off knocking the young man's hat off with his horns that were just beginning to grow, finally clearing a high fence with one bound, and paused, panting on the other side, to gaze through the bars mischievously at the hot, breathless group of men. Nicholas had not joined in the chase. He was standing at the door of the stalls, holding on to his fat belly and shaking all over with his mirth. "I'll take the lot of them," he cried out. "I don't know what the others are like, but I must have that little Vixen. I haven't laughed so much in years. Why, just to see the neat way he clipped off Ivan Prostov's hat." He went into another gale of laughter, then made his way through the crowd to the squire, where he finally concluded the bargain and acquired not 2, but 8 reindeer. Donder and Blitzen, the mama and papa, and their 6 children, Dasher and Dancer, Comet and Cupid, and Prancer, and Vixen. Well, that is about the story of how he got his reindeer. Isn't that amazing? Who knew? Anyway, we've got so much of his story left to tell, and we will see you tomorrow. But in the meanwhile, Merry Christmas.